Since 2022, Russia has controlled the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant in Ukraine. It's maintained a significant military presence and fortifications at and near the plant, turning what is a dangerous site at the best of times into a potential crisis point waiting to happen. But now it's going a step further. Russia is doing something sinister at the Zaporizhzhia power plant, and according to Ukraine, it's all part of a plan to militarize a facility that should have nothing to do with war. The first hints of Russia's intentions came when Vladimir Putin made an interesting statement about the plant during a meeting with the Slovakian Prime Minister Robert Fico in Beijing. According to several reports, including one published by Interfax, Putin told Fico that we can cooperate with American partners on the Zaporizhzhia NPP. In principle, we have also indirectly discussed these issues with them. There's a fair amount to unpack from this short claim. First, note that Putin's emphasis was on the US, which is trying to act as a mediator in ongoing peace discussions between Ukraine and Russia. That simple fact gives some insight into Putin's potential intentions here. Russia's leader is speaking about the plant as though it will be relevant in a future where Ukraine has lost the war and no longer exists. His proposal of cooperation with the US suggests that Putin is thinking about using the plant as a carrot on the end of the stick that he's trying to use to guide the US into making decisions that he wants the country to make. It's all about leverage for Putin, a point which will be dug into later in the video. Second, Putin claims that he's already indirectly discussed these issues with the US. What does that mean exactly? It's hard to say outright, but it suggests that Putin hasn't outright come out and said that he's offering the plant for US use in an effort to get a sweeter deal. Instead, as is often the case with Russia's leader, his wording leaves the door open, implying that the plant could factor into any broader deal. That implication may be enough. Putin is likely trying to influence US decision-making regarding Zaporizhzhia and its vital power plant. Interestingly, the Kyiv Independence report on Putin's statement places a slightly different spin on things. The outlet says that Moscow has suggested that it's open to some sort of three-way cooperation deal related to the plant, a deal that would involve Ukraine as well as the US. There's no hint of this in the quote that Interfax shares, with the mention of a three-way deal instead being made by a Russian news channel called Vesti. Immediately, questions of trust arise. Is Vesti reporting the news accurately, whereas Interfax isn't? Or is it trying to put a positive and Kremlin-approved spin on a statement that could have revealed more than Putin intended? It's not yet known for sure, but the Kyiv Independent suggests that the Vesti reporting is accurate. Putin's statements represent a complete shift from Russia's past refusals to allow Ukraine to continue dealing with the Zaporizhzhia's plant continued oversight. There is one other way to look at what Putin is doing with these types of statements, and it's where the really sinister part of what he said comes into play. By proposing cooperation, whether that involves just Russia and the US, or those two nations alongside Ukraine, Putin is trying to legitimize what is a very illegal takeover of a nuclear facility that has nothing to do with Russia. It's Putin's way of trying to convince the rest of the world that the Zaporizhzhia plant belongs to Russia, with his angling for US involvement being the method he intends to use to gain the legitimacy that simply doesn't exist right now. And Ukraine certainly seems to think that's the case. The country's Ministry of Energy has issued a stark rebuttal to Putin's suggestion, as shared by Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, or RFE-RL. In this context, the public statements of the President of the Russian Federation of September 2, 2025 about the introduction of new unknown management and control systems over the plant should be regarded as evidence of an attempt to use the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as a military tool in the further conduct of the war against Ukraine. Ukraine isn't being shy about what it believes Putin is trying to do here. As has so often been the case since Russia launched its Ukraine invasion, Putin is likely trying to use the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant as a chess piece, a tool that he can use to get what he wants, which appears to be control over the plant itself. Any mention of three-way cooperation with Ukraine, assuming that suggestion was ever made at all, is bound to be just talk. Putin has no intention of sharing with Ukraine, And if he gets his ideal outcome, Ukraine won't even exist to take part in the future management of the facility. However, these efforts by Putin to slyly wrest control of this vital nuclear plant away from Ukraine almost pale in comparison to the issues that are happening at the plant right now. Beyond its response to Putin's cooperation comments, Ukraine's Ministry of Energy has also suggested that Russia would be a terrible parent because it's been operating the plant under dangerous, unstable, and unprecedented conditions ever since it occupied the facility. That's according to United 24 Media, which shares another part of the ministry's statement. Since taking military control of the ZNPP, Russia has caused systemic, critically dangerous disruptions to the plant's operation, Ukraine's Ministry of Energy says. It also goes into detail, covering several of the ways that Russia has caused issues at the plant and used it as a military tool against the Ukrainian people. It's not only about the destruction of the main source of water supply for cooling reactors as a result of the explosion of the Novokharkova Dam, but also about the multiple shutdowns of the station from the Ukrainian power system, which have already led to the complete blackout of the facility 9 times, which is a direct prerequisite for a nuclear accident, the ministry adds. A pretty major question is being asked here. If Russia has already created the conditions for a nuclear accident 9 times since 2022, whether intentionally or otherwise, how could it possibly be trusted to contribute to any sort of cooperative agreement related to the Zaporizhzhia plant? Of course, it couldn't. And Putin knows this. The fact that the answer to the question just posed is obviously that Russia can't be trusted with the plant is what gives rise to Ukraine's accusations that Putin is militarizing the facility. It also reveals that Putin's intentions for the plant may be more insidious than first thought. Sure, Russia's leader would like to use Zaporizhzhia to legitimize the Russian occupation and build closer ties with the US. But whether or not that happens doesn't change the fact that the poor management of the plant is a ploy unto itself. As United 24 points out, Ukraine believes that Russia's attempts to introduce some form of new management to the plant represent a deliberate escalation of nuclear risk that impacts all of Europe. It's almost as though Putin is making a threat. Do what I want with the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, or my troops will keep doing things that degrade the plant's safety to the point where it could become the site of a major nuclear incident. However, there is another way to perceive Putin's statement and the veiled threats that lie within. According to Greenpeace's senior nuclear specialist covering Ukraine, Sean Burney, Putin's statement may reveal that Russia finally understands that it can't manage the plant alone and has no future there if Ukraine doesn't capitulate to its invasion. It might just be that the Kremlin is starting to understand that they have no future at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. More than 3 years after Putin ordered the criminal attack and occupation of the plant, the result is a terrorized local population and a nuclear plant with uniquely dangerous safety and security risks, Burney says. He points out that the plant is in crisis right now, not aided by the Kharkova Dam incident that Ukraine's Ministry of Energy mentioned, adding that only 1 out of the 10 electricity lines connected to the plant is currently operational. Any plans that Russia might have to fully restart the plant must not be allowed to proceed, not just because of the war crimes Russia committed to occupy the plant in the first place, but also because of the complete disregard for the plant that's been shown since the occupation. The IAEA also needs to hear this message. There can be no role for Russia in the future of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. What we need to hear are the Russian plans to end their criminal occupation of the nuclear plant, Burney concludes. So, perhaps Putin's mentions of cooperation are a sign of desperation. One last roll of the dice to ensure Russia still gets a say in what happens to the plant, regardless of how the Ukraine war concludes. Putin may also have made a tacit acknowledgement that Russia is simply too incompetent to operate the plant correctly, meaning it needs help from the very people from whom Russia wrested control of the plant in the first place. Now, moving beyond Putin's sinister plans for a moment, it's worth examining what makes the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant so important that it's now becoming a key point of debate in the Ukraine war. The obvious and most important aspect of the plant is the role that it played in Ukraine's energy sector before Russia's invasion. According to Al Jazeera, Russia and Ukraine have both accused each other of shelling the plant, which is dangerous in its own right. However, Russia's early occupation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant gave it an early opportunity to hit Ukraine where it hurts. By September 2022, most of the plant's external power lines had been disconnected. At present, the sole off-site connection is the main 750 kV line, while the 330 kV reserve line has been disconnected since May 7, 2025. Those disconnections stung Ukraine. In 2021, nuclear power was responsible for 55.5% of the electricity produced in Ukraine, with the Zaporizhzhia plant generating about 20% of that electricity. Al Jazeera also noted in September 2022 that the plant has some strategic importance given that it's only 125 miles from occupied Crimea, which made it an obvious target for Russia. By occupying the plant, Russia cements its control over Crimea and can build forward by also attempting to take control over Zaporizhzhia. The point here is that the plant played a vital role for Ukraine before Russia took it. The deactivation of most of its external lines forced Ukraine into finding alternative and less sustainable electricity sources for a huge portion of its population. Given Ukraine's population of about 37.8 million people, it can be roughly estimated that the shutdown of a nuclear plant serving 20% of Ukraine's energy needs affected approximately 7.5 million people. Zaporizhzhia became part of an ongoing Russian campaign to wreak terror among Ukraine civilians, leaving these people without the power they needed to light and heat their homes in a region that has temperatures hitting an average low of 21 to 23 degrees Fahrenheit in January each year. Per climate data, was a low blow that Russia simply can't argue was intended to hurt Ukraine's military. It was meant to harm civilians, and it worked. All of this feeds into Ukraine's argument that Russia has been trying to militarize the Zaporizhzhia plant ever since its occupation. Putin's claims about Russia being willing to cooperate and what they really mean are just another example of how that plant is being used as a pawn in Russia's military game. After all, if Russia really cared about making the plant operational again, it wouldn't have done all of the damage that it's done to the facility. Beyond the cutting off of external lines and the dam issue mentioned earlier, Russia has essentially stripped it of everything that it needs to operate. The Wilson Center highlighted this in a recap of the initial Russian occupation, noting that Russia showed a complete disregard for anybody's safety by firing on the facility dozens of times when occupying it. Each of those incidents could have caused a catastrophe, but Russia simply didn't care. In the months after the occupation, Russia has converted the Zaporizhzhia plant into an army base and has mined out 2 of its nuclear power units. Ammunition and military vehicles are now being stored in the plant's machinery rooms, again showcasing Russia's utter disregard of how the plant is supposed to be managed. Then there are the people. During Ukraine's independence period, the MPP was much upgraded, including with Western nuclear safety technologies, the Wilson Center says. So, Russian engineers were unable to operate the station without Ukrainian personnel, but the Russian soldiers and engineers took control, killing some of the Ukrainian workers and exerting moral and physical pressure over those who still run the plant, including torture. Do these sound like the actions of a country that has any real intent to run the plant cooperatively? Of course not. Russia's goal with Zaporizhzhia has always been control, and whether through desperation or overconfidence, Putin's sinister talk of cooperation is just another means through which he's attempting to gain that control. Killing and torture haven't magically turned the plant into a usable facility for Russia. Now, Putin is seeking alternative avenues that place Russia on top and leave Ukraine uninvolved, or if it cooperates, only involved to the extent that it operates the plant on Russia's behalf. There's also the sheer danger that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant represents after everything that Russia has done to it. Already noted were the Ukrainian Ministry of Energy's comments about Russia conducting 9 shutdowns that could have caused nuclear incidents. Russia's initial assault on the plant is another example of it playing fast and loose with a very dangerous facility. The Independent put all of this in plain language back in April, when it said that Russia's capture of the plant put the entire world at risk. And it's not the potential destruction of the Zaporizhzhia plant that's the problem, it's what Russia's occupation could mean for the future. The Independent quotes a report by the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, which says, As more countries become interested in pursuing nuclear energy as a source of clean and sustainable power, and as non-proliferation norms are increasingly challenged, the probability that nuclear installations will find themselves the targets or unintentional victims of the use of military force is likely to increase. That conclusion leads right back to Ukraine's accusations of Russia attempting to legitimize its occupation of the Zaporizhzhia plant. RUSI adds that such occupations cannot be allowed to be normalized because doing so would set the stage for future plant attacks. In other words, if Putin gets his way, he knows that assaulting and occupying nuclear plants works. What's to stop him or any other bad actor from doing the same again? The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist builds on this point, noting that Russia is already using the Zaporizhzhia plant as a source of nuclear blackmail in an effort to get ahead of any future Ukrainian attempt to regain control of the plant. Putin's latest comments are just another example of how Russia is trying to use the plant as leverage to gain influence and control. Russia won't outright threaten to destroy the plant, the bulletin says. Doing so will lead to international condemnation that could come from allies like China as much as it would come from the West. Instead, Russia may calculate that couching risky activity at the plant behind just barely credible justifications alongside equally dubious safety assurances could grant it the leverage it seeks, writes the bulletin. To Putin, the Zaporizhzhia plant is little more than a bargaining chip, a tool to be used for leverage. And that is what's now being seen with his latest claims of being willing to cooperate with the US and maybe Ukraine in running the plant. This is Putin's way of saying that Russia already holds the plant, and if everybody wants to prevent the chance of a nuclear incident that Russia won't directly threaten but will certainly imply, then they need to play ball. The big question now is, what does the future of the Zaporizhzhia plant look like? In the immediate sense, the plant is being degraded with every passing month. Russia's lack of ability or sheer unwillingness to operate the plant as it's supposed to be operated is making sure of that. One possibility is that Ukraine could try to take the plant back. But how? It already made one attempt back in October 2022, reports Euromaidan Press, and that effort ended in failure. Ukraine sent 600 soldiers on 30 armed speedboats to storm the plant using anti-tank weapons, grenade launchers, and heavy machine guns, the outlet says. An attempted landing on the left bank of the Dnipro River failed due to Russia putting up a heavy resistance that included the use of mines, tanks and artillery, all weapons that should never be used in a nuclear power facility. Now, Russia is more deeply entrenched in Zaporizhzhia, making any similar assaults very difficult to pull off. Worse yet, a Ukrainian attack on the plant carries with it all of the risks that came with Russia's initial assault. What if something goes wrong? A weapon could trigger the release of toxic materials or create a full-blown nuclear crisis, which Ukraine absolutely doesn't want. Ukraine will find it hard to retake the plant by force. So, Ukraine's only option may be to degrade Russia's military elsewhere to the point where Putin's forces are forced to withdraw because they've lost the war he started. As for Russia, its claims of intended cooperation could serve as a nefarious purpose in the future. On June 5, Bellona reported that Russia is engaging in construction work that seems to indicate its intentions to wire the Zaporizhzhia plant to its own electricity grid. That may show us the future that Putin really envisions. Cooperation with a version of the US serving its own interests, and a subjugated Ukraine in turning the plant into a source of power for Russians rather than Ukrainians. Ukraine can't allow that to happen. Its response to Putin's statements show us that it sees right through the Russia's leaders' games. Now, what's happening at the Zaporizhzhia plant is just one way that Putin presents a threat to Europe. Another is Russia's hybrid warfare, and Putin may have just gone a step too far. Russia has targeted a European Union or EU leader's aircraft, and the EU is ready to make him regret it. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of the latest developments with the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant.